I genuinely thought I was strolling into a milestone 30th birthday bash, but instead, I walked right into a choreographed courtroom drama where my life's worth had been boiled down to a cold, hard spreadsheet. They laid out those DNA results on the dining table like a signed death warrant, hovering over me, just waiting for the moment I'd finally crack under the weight of it. What they didn't count on was a random guest in the back of the room noticing a discrepancy big enough to flip the entire board on them. The second she spoke up, the power dynamic shifted forever. My name is Lucy Hughes. Right now, I'm sitting on the hardwood floor of a cramped one-bedroom apartment that reeks of packing tape and cheap, burnt coffee. There's a half-full cardboard box digging into my knee, overflowing with textbooks I haven't cracked in a decade and old Polaroids that honestly feel like they're glowing with radiation. I'm too terrified to even touch them. I've been paralyzed here for 2 solid hours, just zoning out on a patch of peeling beige paint on the far wall. I'm trying to wrap my head around how a person is supposed to hit the reset button on their entire existence when the very floor they were standing on has been vaporized. I want to be clear. I don't owe anyone this explanation. I'm saying that out loud mostly to convince myself it's true. For the last 3 weeks, ever since that nightmare of a 30th birthday, I've felt this suffocating, crushing pressure to just shut up and disappear. It's like I'm wearing this heavy, itchy blanket of shame that isn't even mine to carry. Yet somehow, I'm the one sweating under it. People love to romanticize the truth. They talk about it like it's some cleansing, holy rain that's supposed to wash away the filth of a lie. They tell you to be grateful for the clarity, no matter how much the jagged edges of that clarity cut you. They always say, well, at least now you know the deal. But those people are full of it. They don't tell you that sometimes the truth isn't a relief. It's a literal wrecking ball that smashes through your front window without a second of warning. It leaves you standing in a pile of drywall and broken glass while everyone else stands safely on the sidewalk, snacking on popcorn and watching the dust settle. I'm not writing this because I'm thankful for the trauma. I'm writing this because, in my case, staying silent feels like helping them tell a lie. If I keep my mouth shut, I'm letting them narrate my ending. I'm letting them file me away as some unfortunate mistake they finally managed to fix, a clerical error they shredded and tossed in the recycling bin. And let me tell you something, I refuse to be anyone's clerical error. There's this blue cashmere sweater sitting on top of my donation pile right now. It's high-end, soft, and that specific shade of ocean blue you see on overpriced travel brochures. My mother, Alina, bought it for me last Christmas. Looking around, almost everything I own is a variation of that color. My sheets are navy. My SUV is sky blue. Even my childhood bedroom was painted periwinkle. For 30 years, I've told everyone, from first dates to HR icebreakers, that blue is my favorite color. Hey, I'm Lucy, and I'm a blue person. But staring at that sweater now, a terrifying thought is clawing at my throat. Do I actually even like the color blue? Or did I just convince myself I liked it because Alina told me it, brought out my eyes? Did I adopt it because it was just path of least resistance to let her dress me and mold me, rather than dealing with that icy, silent disappointment she'd weaponize if I picked something she didn't approve of? It feels like a stupid, petty thing to obsess over while my life is in literal ruins. But it's the loose thread. If you pull it, the whole tapestry of who I am starts to unravel. If I don't even know my own favorite color, what else about me is just a fabricated lie? I hit the big 30 last month. That number was supposed to be my finish line. I spent my entire 20s on the absolute grind, pulling 60-hour weeks and sprinting up the corporate ladder at Arborcrest Compliance Group. I'm in risk management. My whole career is literally built on the ability to predict a disaster before it happens. I read the fine print. I hunt for the tiny cracks in the foundation so the whole building doesn't come down. I'm damn good at it, too. I'm meticulous. I'm the person who catches the decimal point error that saves a company. I'd spent 10 years building a reputation as the woman who sees the invisible details. I had just wrapped a massive audit that saved my firm nearly $2 million in potential regulatory fines. I felt untouchable. I felt like I'd finally paid my dues and earned my seat at the table. I thought my 30th birthday was going to be the victory lap for that stability. I thought I was walking into a party that would finally force my father, Arthur, to acknowledge that Lucy Hughes had actually made it. I was ready for some expensive Cabernet and maybe, if the stars aligned, a rare good job from my dad about my promotion. My parents weren't the warm and fuzzy type. We didn't do big hugs or I love yous. We were a family of firm handshakes, crisp nods, and tactical silence. My father, Arthur, treats every dinner conversation like a legal deposition. He only gives up information if it's absolutely necessary. He's a tall man, always draped in some expensive charcoal suit, with eyes that don't just look at you, they assess your market value. My mother is his perfect match, a woman of rigid aesthetics and emotions that are kept under a literal lock and key. Alina doesn't do messy feelings. She doesn't scream. She doesn't cry. She just sighs. It's the sigh of a martyr who is constantly exhausted by how much the rest of the world fails to meet her insane standards. Growing up in that house, I learned fast that peace was a currency, and the price was total perfection. I bought my safety with a transcript full of straight A's. I bought their approval by being the easy kid, the one who never missed curfew, never asked for a dime, and made herself as low maintenance as a piece of IKEA furniture. I sculpted myself into exactly what they wanted. I sanded down my personality until I was smooth and non-threatening. I thought that was the contract. I thought if I followed their unwritten rules and became the high-achieving professional they demanded, I'd be safe. I thought I was an investment in a future where we'd eventually be equals. I didn't realize that to them, I wasn't an investment at all. I was a line-item expense, and they were just waiting for the fiscal year to end so they could restructure and cut their losses. The most twisted part of what went down isn't even the biology of it. I need to make that clear. Biology is just a lab report. DNA is just a sequence of code. If they had sat me down for a quiet talk and told me I was adopted or that there had been a mix-up at the hospital, I would have been floored, sure. I would have been hurt, but I would have gotten it. I would have reached across the table and held their hands. We could have walked through that fire together. Because families are messy, and I get that. I could have forgiven a lie that was told out of fear or even a misguided sense of love. But this wasn't a confession, it was a tactical ambush. They staged it. That's the part that keeps me staring at the ceiling fan at 3:00 a.m. until my eyes literally burn. They planned my public humiliation with the same surgical precision Arthur uses for his annual tax filings. They sent out the invites. They set the execution time. They prepped the evidence. My father probably printed that spreadsheet days in advance, making sure the toner was full so the numbers were nice and crisp. My mother probably hand-picked the catering menu, choosing the fancy appetizers while knowing exactly what was going to go down before the first tray even left the kitchen. They let me drive home thinking I was heading to a celebration, while they were standing behind the door with a guillotine, just waiting for me to stick my neck out. It takes a very specific, dark kind of malice to weaponize a person's birthday. It takes a total lack of human empathy to look at the daughter you raised for 3 decades and see nothing but a defendant in a lawsuit you're dying to win. I keep replaying that drive to their house in my head. I was listening to a podcast, humming along, thinking about the bottle of Pinot Noir I had sitting in the passenger seat. It was a $20 bottle, decent, not flashy, exactly the kind of practical gift my parents wouldn't criticize. I was actually happy. That's the real tragedy. I was genuinely, stupidly content. I felt like I was on solid ground. I had zero clue the ground was actually a trapdoor, and my parents were standing right by the lever, checking their synchronized watches, waiting for the clock to strike. When I look back at my childhood now through the lens of that night, all my memories are warping. I see the coldness not as a personality trait, but as a long-term strategy. I see the lack of my photos on the walls not as minimalism, but as a total lack of attachment. I see the way Alina never really looked at me. She looked through me, like she was tolerating a houseguest who had overstayed their welcome by 20 years. I wonder how long they'd been sitting on this. Did they look at me across the dinner table when I was 10, or 16, or 25, and whisper about when they'd finally evict me? Did they have a literal countdown on their Google calendars? The sheer cruelty of it is breathtaking. It's so massive I can't even find the edges. They didn't just want to break up with me. They wanted to burn the bridge, salt the earth, and make sure I never had the backbone to look them in the eye ever again. They wanted me to crawl out of that house feeling like a zero. They wanted me to feel like a fraud, a thief who had stolen their resources for 30 years. And the scary part, it almost worked. When I was standing in that kitchen, surrounded by extended family and neighbors who were staring at me with this gross mix of pity and can't-look-away morbid curiosity, I felt my entire reality dissolving. I felt shame rising in my throat like hot bile. I was actually ready to accept their verdict. I was ready to believe I was the villain, some parasite who had unknowingly drained them dry. My training at Arborcrest taught me to respect documentation and bow before the evidence. And there they were, holding the proof, looking so incredibly righteous. Arthur's voice was so steady. Eleanor's silence was deafening. Who was I to argue? Who was I to cause a scene? If I had walked out of that house alone that night, I think I would have just driven my car off the nearest bridge. I say that with zero drama, it's just clinical fact. I would have shattered. I would have accepted their narrative that I was worthless, and I would have vanished just like they planned. But the universe has a weird sense of humor, or maybe it just hates a plot hole. Because my parents, in all their arrogance, made one fatal mistake. They assumed everyone in that room would play their assigned role. They assumed the audience would just sit there quietly and watch the execution. They thought that because they had the money, the status, and the proof, nobody would have the guts to question the script. They forgot that life isn't a spreadsheet. They forgot that you can't control every single variable, no matter how much you prep the room. They didn't account for the woman in the gray suit. She wasn't family. She wasn't a close friend. I didn't even know her name when the night kicked off, but she was the glitch in their perfect system. She was the only person who looked at that table, looked at the papers, and saw exactly what nobody else was looking for. She spotted the one detail that was off. Not just a little wrong. Wrong enough to pull their entire house of cards down. If that night had gone the way Arthur and Eleanor planned, I'd be gone. But because of her, because of that one voice that sliced through the silence, I'm still here. I'm sitting on this floor, surrounded by boxes, terrified and brokenhearted. But I am here, and I'm starting to realize that the story they tried to tell about me wasn't the end. It was just the prologue to something much darker and way more important. They wanted a trial. They wanted to present their case. Well, fine, they're going to get one. But they aren't the judges anymore, and I am definitely not the defendant. I'm Lucy Hughes. I'm 30 years old. I officially hate the color blue, and I am done being the quiet child. The drive out to their estate in Oak Ridge usually takes 40 minutes, but that night the highway felt like a conveyor belt. The lights were a perfect string of greens, and the late October air coming through the window had that crisp, burning leaves scent. It was the kind of night that tricks you into thinking the world is actually organized. I had that bottle of Pinot in the passenger seat, a $20 vintage from a local shop. It wasn't fine wine, but it was reliable, which was my whole brand. I was tapping my fingers on the wheel to some classic rock, mentally checking off my 30s checklist. Item 1. Survive the Arborcrest audit without catching a felony charge or an ulcer. Check. Item 2. Start a real down payment fund for a house with a porch where I can pretend to like gardening. Item 3. Fix the parents. Not emotional healing fix, more like fix a leaky faucet fix. Tighten the screws, stop the dripping, and make it functional enough to ignore for another 6 months. I pulled off the main road and cruised into the subdivision where I grew up. These houses were all suburban dream templates, brick fronts, lawns that looked like green velvet, and driveways wide enough for a private jet. It's a neighborhood that whispers wealth, so you don't have to scream it. As I hit the cul-de-sac, I felt that familiar tightness in my chest, the mental corset I always put on before seeing them, but I breathed through it. It was just dinner. A quick meal, some polite updates on my career, maybe a slice of cake if Eleanor was feeling festive. And then I'd be in my own bed by 10:00. Then I saw the cars. At first, my brain just glitched. My parents don't host. They don't do weeknight hangouts. They definitely don't fill their driveway and the entire street with a fleet of luxury sedans and SUVs. I slowed to a crawl, my headlights hitting the lineup. I saw Uncle Miller's massive dually truck parked with 2 wheels on the grass, a lawn crime that would usually make Arthur blow a gasket. I saw Aunt Janice's beige wagon, and then there were cars I didn't even recognize. 2 generic rental sedans, dark, official-looking, and definitely unfriendly. My heart started thumping against my ribs like a trapped bird. This wasn't a party. My parents hated surprises. They thought surprising someone was a form of social aggression. The only logical answer was a medical emergency. My brain went to 100 mph on the worst-case scenarios. Arthur had a heart attack. Eleanor had a stroke. There was a silent kitchen fire. Someone was dead. The house was looming there, dark against the purple sky, feeling completely ominous. I parked haphazardly behind the line of cars, not even caring if I blocked the mailbox. I grabbed the wine bottle out of pure reflex, gripping it by the neck like a club, and ran toward the house. I skipped the front door. The front door was for guests and solicitors. Family went through the garage. I punched the 4-digit code into the keypad, my birthday, a code they never bothered to update, and the heavy door groaned open. The smell hit me instantly, and I almost collapsed with relief. It was the smell of my childhood safety: motor oil, cedar sawdust, and that chemical tang of lawn fertilizer. This was Arthur's war room. The garage was the only place his rigid CEO persona softened into organized hobbyist. His tools were on the pegboard with military precision, every wrench outlined in Sharpie so he'd know if one was out of place. The floor was swept. The air was cool. I walked past his workbench, my heels clicking on the concrete, the sound echoing in the silence. I took a breath. "It's okay," I whispered to myself. "If there was an ambulance, it'd be in the driveway. No cops, no lights, it's just a family meeting. Maybe a divorce summit or something." I reached for the door handle leading into the kitchen. The metal was freezing. I fixed my face, engaging my concerned daughter muscles, ready to pivot to birthday girl if I was wrong. I turned the knob and pushed. I expected a wall of noise. I expected the chaos of a family crisis. Aunt Janice's high-pitched rambling, Miller's booming laugh, the sound of the Keurig. Instead, I walked into a wall of silence so thick it felt like a pressurized cabin. The kitchen was bright, aggressively bright. Every single recessed light was dimmed to surgical theater levels, bouncing off the white granite. The room was packed. There had to be 20 people, maybe more, crammed into the open-plan space. But nobody was moving. Nobody was eating. Nobody was even holding a drink. They were standing in these weird, loose clusters, like statues in a haunted museum. The second the door clicked shut behind me, every single head snapped in my direction. I froze. I was still clutching that cheap bottle of gas station wine, and suddenly I felt like an idiot, like I'd brought a plastic spoon to a knife fight. I scanned the faces, looking for a tell. I saw my cousin Sarah, who usually tackles me with a hug, staring intently at her own shoes. I saw Aunt Janice. Her arms crossed so tight over her chest that her knuckles were turning white. I saw neighbors I hadn't talked to in 5 years. Their faces were unreadable. They weren't sad, and they definitely weren't happy. They were waiting. "Mom," I said. My voice sounded tiny, thin, and totally pathetic for a room that size. Eleanor was standing by the island, scrubbing a spot on the marble that was already spotless. She was wearing her navy hosting cardigan, the one with the pearl buttons, and her hair was sprayed into that immovable blonde-gray helmet. She heard me. I saw her shoulders lock up, but she wouldn't look up. She just kept rubbing that counter, eyes fixed on an invisible stain, her lips pressed into a line so thin they were basically gone. It was a look I knew by heart. It was the look of someone avoiding a car wreck they'd personally caused. "Dad," I tried again, turning to the right. Arthur was standing by the fireplace, absolutely dominating the space. He wasn't in his casual clothes. He was in a full suit, no tie, his collar unbuttoned just enough to show the tense cords in his neck. He was holding a file. This wasn't just a folder. It was a thick, professionally bound dossier with a clear plastic cover and a black spiral spine. He held it with both hands against his chest, like a shield, or a weapon he was waiting to draw. He was looking right at me, but there was zero warmth. No "happy birthday, Lucy." No "glad you're here." His eyes were flat. He was auditing me, scanning me from my messy, wind-blown hair down to my scuffed office flats, checking me off like a data point that had finally arrived to complete a set. The silence dragged on, agonizingly weird. The only sound was the hum of the fridge and the tick-tock of the grandfather clock in the foyer. Every tick sounded like a countdown. My brain was screaming for a rational answer. They're playing a prank, I thought. This is some weird, high-concept surprise party. Any second now, they'll yell surprise, and we'll all laugh about how terrified I look. But the air didn't taste like a joke. It tasted like ozone. It tasted like the 5 minutes before a massive thunderstorm, when the sky turns that bruised, nasty purple and the birds stop singing because they know what's coming. "Is everything okay?" I asked, taking a shaky step forward. "Is someone sick?" Arthur cleared his throat. The sound was sharp, like a judge's gavel hitting a desk. "We're all perfectly healthy, Lucy," he said. His voice was calm, measured, and completely drained of any fatherly affection. It was his boardroom voice, the voice he used when he was telling a VP their career was over for cause. I looked back at Alina. "Mom, what is this? Why is everyone here?" She finally stopped the obsessive scrubbing. She lifted her head, but she stared right past my left ear at a point on the wall. Her eyes were glassy, not with tears, but with a weird, brittle resolve. She looked like someone who had rehearsed a speech 1,000 times and was terrified she was going to trip over the first line. "We thought it was time," she said, her voice shaking before it smoothed into a cold, practiced monotone. "We thought it was finally time to clear the ledger." The ledger. The word hung there, sharp and totally foreign. I looked around the room again and finally realized the seating chart wasn't random. These people weren't guests. They were a jury. They'd been briefed. They knew the case against me, and they were watching me with a mix of poor girl pity and I can't believe I get to see this excitement. The warmth I felt in the garage evaporated. The kitchen felt like a walk-in freezer. I could feel the color literally draining out of my skin. This wasn't a medical crisis. This wasn't a party. Arthur took a step away from the fireplace, moving into the center of the room like he was taking the floor at a shareholders' meeting. He slammed the thick file down onto the heavy oak dining table. The thud was soft, but in that silence, it sounded like a gunshot. "Put the wine down, Lucy," he said. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a command. I set the bottle on the counter, my hands shaking so hard I had to clasp them together to hide it. I don't understand," I said. I hated how small and pleading I sounded. I was 30. I was a senior compliance officer. I literally manage risk for a living. And yet, standing in that kitchen, I felt like I was 6 years old and had just smashed a vase I wasn't supposed to touch. "What exactly is in that folder, Dad?" My voice felt like it was coming from someone else, someone much smaller and more fragile. My father's hand stayed heavy on the plastic cover, pinning it to the oak table like he was securing a crime scene. "This," he said, his voice dropping into that terrifying register of corporate finality he usually reserved for firing VPs, "is the absolute truth. And quite frankly, Lucy, it's about 20 years past due." I stared at the dossier. From my angle, I could see the jagged edge of a spreadsheet peeking out from the first page. It was a grid of numbers, columns, and dates, the universal language of people who view the world as a game of profit and loss. I looked at Alina again, my heart basically screaming at her to end this charade. I was begging her to step in, to be the parent for once, to tell me this was just some sick, twisted misunderstanding or a prank in incredibly poor taste. But she had already checked out of the room mentally. She turned her back to me and started filling a glass with water from the fridge dispenser. The loud, mechanical hum of the motor filled the silence, a white noise that signaled her total abandonment. She was leaving me to drown in the center of the room while she hydrated. The realization hit me like a physical punch to the gut. They didn't invite all these people over, the aunts, the neighbors, the random cousins, to celebrate me hitting the big 3-0. They invited them to be witnesses to a public execution. This wasn't a birthday. It was a high-stakes performance of shame, and I wasn't the guest of honor. I was the sacrificial lamb. The home I'd driven to, the one that smelled like cedar and safety, was a ghost. In its place was a cold, sterile courtroom, and the jury had reached a verdict before I'd even put my Honda in park. The file sat on the oak table between us, a dead weight that seemed to suck the oxygen right out of the kitchen. Arthur's manicured fingernails began a slow, rhythmic tapping on the plastic cover. Tap, tap, tap. It sounded like a beetle hitting a window pane in a dead quiet house. "Open it," he commanded. I glanced at Alina. She was white-knuckling her water glass, her eyes glued to the floor tiles as if she were trying to count the grout lines. She looked like an ice sculpture of a mother, slowly melting under the aggressive glare of the recessed lighting. She wouldn't meet my eyes. That was the first guilty verdict of the night. I reached out, my fingers trembling, and flipped the cover. I expected a lawsuit. Maybe a deed to a house I didn't know about, or some terminal medical diagnosis they'd been hiding. Instead, I saw a spreadsheet. Landscape orientation. Arial font, size 10. Meticulous. The header at the top was bolded and underlined. LEXPNSES 1995-2 present. My brain actually glitched. I'm a risk manager. I live in Excel, but I couldn't process these cells. I tried to read the columns, but the numbers were just a blur of black ink on white paper. Date. Description. Category. Cost. Adjusted for inflation. "What is this?" I whispered, my voice sounding like it was coming from the bottom of a well. "Read the first line, Lucy. Don't be difficult," Arthur ordered. I looked down. October 14th, 1995. Medical, labor and delivery complications, out-of-pocket deductibles. I moved my finger down the list, feeling like I was touching something radioactive. June 1998, preschool tuition. August 2001, emergency room, fractured radius. December 2003, piano lessons. July 2008, orthodontics, phase 1. It was my entire life. My whole existence had been stripped of memories, stripped of context, and boiled down into a series of debit transactions. I remembered breaking my arm in 2nd grade. I remembered the white-hot pain and the way Arthur had carried me to the car, telling me I was a tough soldier. I'd spent 20 years thinking he was my hero in that moment. But on this paper, that memory wasn't about heroism or comfort. It was just an entry, $450. I saw the piano lessons I'd hated but took because a leaner wanted a refined child to show off at brunch, $2,000. I saw the summer camp where I had my first kiss behind the mess hall, $1,200. I saw my prom dress, the one I thought made me look like a movie star, $200. The list was thicker than a Stephen King novel. It detailed every calorie I'd eaten, every thread I'd worn, every gallon of gas they'd put in my car for college. At the very bottom of the final page, there was a bolded figure, a sum so massive it looked like a high score in a video game or a mid-sized corporate debt. "We've been incredibly patient," Arthur said. His voice was flat, totally devoid of any fatherly inflection. He sounded like a CEO reading a quarterly earnings report that had missed the mark by 5%. "We've been exceptionally generous, considering the circumstances." "Generous," I choked out. "Dad, are you telling me you kept receipts for raising me, for being my parents?" "We kept records," he corrected sharply. "Compliance, Lucy. You work in the field. You know you keep records when you need to ensure the investment is sound. When the investment is no longer sound, you cut the cord." He reached over and flipped a tab to the second section of the dossier. The spreadsheet was gone, replaced by a document with a medical letterhead. It was a DNA test result from some generic online lab. I stared at the bar graphs and the scientific jargon, but my eyes locked onto one devastating sentence that felt like it was written in fire. Probability of paternity, 0%. Probability of maternity, 0%. The room went dead silent. I could hear the hum of the fridge. I could hear the shallow breathing of the 20 people standing behind me, waiting for the fallout. I felt like the floor had vanished and I was free-falling through the center of the earth. "The hospital made a mistake," Arthur said. He didn't sound angry or sad. He sounded like he was explaining a shipping error on a misplaced Amazon order. "We've suspected it for a while. You never looked like us. You never acted like us. You were always different, too emotional, too chaotic, too much of a wild card for this family." He looked at me then, really looked at me, and his eyes were just empty, gray voids. "We confirmed it last week. You aren't a Hughes. You're a total stranger, and we are officially done paying for a stranger." I turned to a leaner one last time, my eyes burning. "Mom," I begged. "Mom, please tell me this is a sick joke. Tell me you don't care about a piece of paper." She finally looked up. Her face was pale, her lips trembling. For a split second, I thought she was going to snap out of it, that she'd run over, tackle-hug me, and tell me she didn't care about the biology because she was the one who tucked me in for 30 years. But she didn't. She looked at the spreadsheet. Then she looked at the DNA test. Then she looked at her husband. She took a breath, smoothed her expensive cardigan, and gave a tiny, jerky nod. "It's just too much money, Lucy," she whispered, her voice cracking. "We can't keep pouring water into a bucket that isn't ours. It's fiscally irresponsible." The silence that followed was shattered by a sound that made my skin crawl. Clap, clap, clap. Slow, rhythmic applause. I turned around, dazed. It was Uncle Miller. He was nodding, a grim, self-righteous look on his face, slamming his meaty hands together. Then Aunt Janice joined in. Then a neighbor from 3 houses down. It wasn't congratulations applause, it was the applause of agreement. A jury delivering a guilty verdict. They were validating the math. They were looking at the data and agreeing. Yes, the investment failed. The ROI is 0. Cut the loss. I stood there, paralyzed. The betrayal was so surgical, so efficient. 10 minutes ago, I was their daughter. Now I was a line-item veto. There was no screaming match, no tears from them. Just a brutal business decision executed in front of an audience to make sure the narrative was set before I could even try to defend myself. "We aren't monsters, Lucy," Arthur said, closing the dossier with a thud that echoed like a coffin lid hitting the floor. "We aren't throwing you out with 0 notice. We're giving you a head start." He pointed toward the mudroom. Sitting there, looking small and pathetic against the designer wallpaper, was my old high school gym bag, a faded navy duffel with a peeling mascot. "Your mother packed a bag for you. Essentials only. You have exactly 1 hour to vacate the premises. The rest of your things, the items we purchased with Hugh's money, will be liquidated to recoup a fraction of the costs in that document." I looked at that bag. That was the knife that finally hit bone. The DNA was a shock, but the bag meant they'd been in my room while I was at work. While I was driving here, excited for cake and a glass of wine, Alina had been in my private space. She opened my drawers. She decided what I was allowed to keep from my own life. She folded my clothes with the cold efficiency of a landlord clearing out an evicted tenant after a long legal battle. 1 hour, I repeated, my voice hollow and empty. 1 hour, Arthur confirmed, checking his Rolex. "After that, the locks are changed. If you cause a scene or try to stay, I call the police. We have the documentation to prove you have no legal right to be on this property. You're a guest who has overstayed their welcome." My knees buckled. I grabbed the granite island to keep from hitting the floor. The room was spinning in a sickening blur. The faces of my family, my former family, blurred into a kaleidoscope of judgment. They looked like strangers. No, worse, strangers have pity for people in pain. These people had receipts. I felt the darkness creeping into the edges of my vision. I was a fraud. I was a mistake. I was nothing. "Excuse me." The voice cut through the thick, toxic air like a scalpel. It wasn't loud, but it had a tone of such absolute, icy authority that every single person in that kitchen went dead still. I blinked, my vision clear. A woman was standing in the corner by the pantry. I hadn't even noticed her when I walked in. She was wearing a sharp gray suit that probably cost more than my entire college tuition. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, perfect bun, and her rimless glasses caught the clinical light of the kitchen. She didn't look like a suburban guest. She looked like she'd stepped off a private jet from a global tech summit. "Who are you?" Arthur asked, his brow furrowing. He hated variables he hadn't personally accounted for in his plan. "I'm Dr. Sloane Mercer," she said, stepping forward. Her heels clicked on the tile with a deliberate, rhythmic sound that commanded the room. The crowd parted for her like she was the Red Sea. "I came as a +1 with your cousin, Mr. Henderson. He mentioned there might be a genetic discussion tonight. Since that's my professional field, I thought it might be illuminating to observe." She reached the table. She didn't look at me, and she didn't look at my parents. She looked only at the dossier, her eyes sharp and predatory. "You're a geneticist?" Arthur asked, his tone shifting to that fake polite, professional voice he used with peers. "Then you understand the gravity of this. The data is irrefutable." Dr. Mercer didn't ask for permission. She picked up the file and flipped straight to the DNA section. Her eyes scanned the page with terrifying, robotic speed. She tilted her head, adjusted her glasses, and let out a soft, contemplative hum. Arthur puffed out his chest, looking for validation. "As you can see, the markers are decisive. 0%. a clear-cut case of hospital error. We've been raising someone else's child for 3 decades. Doctor, Mercer said, and for the first time she looked Arthur directly in the eye. There was a glint there, the look of an apex predator who just saw a massive opening. It's a very thorough presentation. The spreadsheet is, well, it's impressive in its pettiness. The narrative is certainly compelling for a layperson. She dropped the dossier back onto the table. It landed with a slap that was louder than the applause had been. However, she said, letting the word hang in the air until the tension was unbearable, there is a massive, fundamental problem with your evidence. Problem? Arthur scoffed, his face reddening. The lab is fully accredited. I checked the certifications myself. I'm not talking about the lab's credentials, Mr. Hughes, Mercer said, her voice dropping an octave and becoming deadly serious. She placed one long finger on the colorful bar graph Arthur was so proud of. I'm talking about the basic laws of science. I've been a genetic counselor and a forensic specialist for 15 years. I've reviewed thousands of these reports. She looked around the room, making slow eye contact with the jury, then settled her gaze back on my parents. This report contains a significant irregularity. In fact, if I didn't know better, I'd say it contains a biological impossibility. Arthur's face went rigid. Eleanor's hand flew to her mouth, her glass of water nearly slipping. The air pressure in the room felt like it dropped 10 points, the way it does right before a tornado levels a house. Lucy, Dr. Mercer said, turning to me for the first time. Her eyes were dark and incredibly intelligent. In that split second, I saw something I hadn't seen all night, a flickering light of hope. Don't pick up that bag yet. You don't need to leave. Then she turned back to Arthur, her voice sharpening into a razor blade. Because I don't think this document proves she's a stranger. I think it proves something else entirely. Something you probably didn't want anyone to find out. I didn't wait for Arthur to respond to her. I didn't wait for the relatives to start their frantic whispering. The air in that kitchen had become toxic, a poisonous gas filling my lungs, and my only instinct was survival. I needed out now. I reached out, snatched the dossier off the table, and tucked it under my arm. Arthur flinched, his hand twitching, but he was too busy staring at Dr. Mercer in shock to stop me. I walked toward the mudroom, and every single step felt like I was wading through deep, freezing water. I passed Uncle Miller, the man who taught me to fish when I was 7. He was staring intently at a bowl of potato salad, refusing to look at me. I passed Sarah, my childhood best friend. She was aggressively scrolling on her phone, her thumb moving a mile a minute, pretending I didn't exist. It was a graveyard. I was walking through a cemetery of 30 years of dead connections. I grabbed the navy duffel. It was light, insultingly light. In Eleanor's mind, my entire existence weighed less than a Thanksgiving turkey. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't slam the door. I didn't give them the satisfaction of a scene. I just stepped into the garage and let the door click shut. The sound was the period at the end of a very long, very painful sentence. I threw the bag and the file into the passenger seat and keyed the ignition. My hands were totally numb, like they didn't belong to my body. I backed out of the driveway, navigated the obstacle course of family SUVs, and drove away from the only life I had ever known. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. I knew if I saw that warm yellow light in the windows of the house where they were all still standing, I'd lose control and drive into a tree. I drove for an hour, no destination, just needing the physical sensation of moving forward while my life felt like it was sliding into a bottomless abyss. I ended up at a 24-hour spot called the Silver Spoon, a neon and grease diner tucked next to a truck stop on the interstate. It was the kind of place where nobody asks why you're alone on your birthday at midnight, looking like you just survived a natural disaster. I sat in a back booth with cracked red vinyl held together by layers of silver duct tape. A waitress named Darlene dropped a laminated, sticky menu in front of me. She smelled like industrial coffee and menthol cigarettes. "What can I get you, hun? You look like you've seen a ghost." I wasn't hungry. My stomach was tied in a complex nautical knot, but I needed to do something normal to prove I was still a human being who existed in the physical world. "I'll take a banana split," I said, "and a side of onion rings, and keep the coffee coming." Darlene didn't even blink. "Whipped cream on the rings or just the split?" she cracked, a dry, rasping laugh escaping her throat. Just the split, and make the coffee black. When she left, I was alone with a sugar dispenser, a bottle of generic ketchup, and the dossier. I opened it under the harsh, flickering fluorescent lights of the diner. It was a masterpiece of pettiness. August 2004, summer reading books, $56.30. February 2010, senior prom ticket, $85. November 2012, deductible for fender bender, $500. The total at the bottom was $342,891.14. I stared at the number until it burned into my retinas. $342K. That was the price tag they had put on my soul. They had quantified 30 years of family dinners, school plays, and Christmas mornings down to the very last cent. It was almost funny in a dark, twisted, cosmic sort of way. I imagined Arthur sitting in his study late at night, entering these receipts into an Excel sheet, feeling a surge of satisfaction as the debt grew. To him, I wasn't a daughter. I was a depreciating asset that needed to be written off. My phone buzzed in my pocket. My heart spiked. Maybe it was a leaner. Maybe she'd broken the trance, realized she loved me, and was calling to tell me to come home. It was a work notification. A calendar reminder for a team sync at 9:00 a.m. tomorrow. I laughed, a sharp, ugly, hysterical sound that made a trucker at the counter turn around and stare. I was sitting in a greasy diner with a bill for my existence, and my phone was reminding me to update a corporate compliance log. I opened my email. I couldn't go in tomorrow. I couldn't sit in a glass-walled conference room discussing risk mitigation for a multi-million-dollar firm when my own life had just hit 100% catastrophic failure. I typed a frantic message to my boss, David. Subject: personal emergency. David, I'm requesting immediate personal leave. A massive family medical matter has come up. I'll be offline until further notice. All audit reports are uploaded to the shared drive. Thanks for understanding, Lucy. I hit send. It felt weirdly anticlimactic. I just paused my entire career in 3 sentences typed on a greasy screen. Darlene arrived with the banana split and the onion rings. The combination looked absolutely revolting. I took a bite of whipped cream. It tasted like nothing, like air. I pushed the file aside and unzipped the gym bag. I needed to see what a leaner considered essential for a daughter she was disowning. I pulled out a stack of clothes. College t-shirts, some old sweatpants, a pair of jeans from 2 years ago that didn't even fit me anymore. It was the inventory of a stranger. Where was my jewelry? Where were the journals I'd kept since I was 12? Where was the silver locket from my grandmother? She grabbed the surface layer of my life, the junk, and left the core behind to be liquidated and sold off to the highest bidder. I dug deeper into the side pocket of the bag, my frustration boiling over. My fingers brushed something cold, hard, and metallic. I pulled it out. It was a small silver key, the kind you use for a diary or a small, cheap lockbox. It had a piece of yellowing masking tape wrapped around the head with a number written in blue ink. 42. I didn't recognize it. I didn't own a lockbox at my parents' house. I reached back into the pocket and found a thin white envelope, crumpled like it had been shoved in during a hurry. No name on the front. I tore it open, my breath hitching. Inside was a single sheet of yellowed notepad paper. The handwriting was unmistakable. Eleanor's looping, precise, perfect mother script, but it wasn't a list of groceries or chores. Alpha Fidelity Trust, account ending in 8940. Disbursement date, October 14, 2026. Reference, LH Settlement. I stared at the date. October 14, 2026. That was today, my 30th birthday. But the paper was old. The ink was faded, the edges soft and velvety from years of sitting in the back of a drawer. This note wasn't written last week after a DNA test. It was written years ago. A chill washed over me that had nothing to do with the diner's blast of AC. Disbursement is a financial term I know well. It means a payout, a release of restricted funds. LH Settlement, Lucy Hughes Settlement. I looked at the key again. 42. My auditor's brain, the one trained to spot glitches and fraud indicators in corporate data, started to redline. The spreadsheet Arthur showed me was a justification for cutting me off. They claimed I was a burden. They claimed they couldn't afford to support a stranger. But this note suggested something else entirely. If they had a note about a massive payout scheduled for my 30th birthday, and that note was years old, then this wasn't a sudden reaction to a DNA test. They'd known for a long, long time. Arthur lied through his teeth when he said they confirmed it last week. They'd been sitting on this information, planning for this exact date like a scheduled merger. Why wait until I was exactly 30? Alpha Fidelity Trust sounded like an investment firm or a holding company. And settlement implied a legal agreement, the kind you get after an accident or a lawsuit. The pieces started clicking into a terrifying, dark configuration in my mind. They didn't kick me out because they were mad about the DNA. They kicked me out because of what happens to the money when I turn 30. The spreadsheet was a distraction, a psychological prop designed to make me feel guilty and worthless so I'd walk away into the night without asking a single question. They wanted me to feel like I owed them money so I wouldn't realize there was a fortune waiting for me. Eleanor must have scooped this envelope up by accident while she was frantically clearing out my drawers to meet the 1-hour deadline. This wasn't a tragedy of biology. This was a sophisticated heist. I looked out the window at the dark, empty parking lot. I felt a surge of adrenaline, sharp and electric, cutting through the shock. I wasn't just a victim in a sad family drama anymore. I was a loose end in a multi-$100,000 financial scheme. I picked up a cold, greasy onion ring and took a bite. Suddenly, I had an appetite. I needed to find out what Alpha Fidelity was, and I needed to know what that key opened. Arthur thought he'd closed the book on Lucy Hughes tonight. He thought he'd balanced the ledger and deleted the file. But he made a fatal mistake. He let me leave with the one piece of paper he should have shredded and burned. I took a long sip of the burnt, bitter coffee. It tasted like fuel. "Check, please," I called out to Darlene, my voice steady for the first time all night. I wasn't going to go hide in a motel and cry. I had a puzzle to solve, and I was the best auditor in the state. For the first time in 3 hours, I didn't feel like a ghost. Ghosts don't have keys, and they certainly don't get settlements. I pushed open the heavy glass door and stepped into the parking lot. The cold night air hit my face, drying the sweat on my forehead instantly. I adjusted the strap of my bag, feeling the weight of the dossier against my hip like a weapon. I had a key I didn't understand, a note about a trust fund I didn't know existed, and a stomach full of half-melted ice cream. I felt nauseous and wired at the same time. I walked toward my car, fishing for my keys. I just wanted to find a room with blackout curtains and a secure Wi-Fi connection. "Ms. Hughes." The voice came from the shadows by the dumpster enclosure. It wasn't threatening, but it was startlingly clear and calm. I spun around, clutching my car keys between my knuckles like a brass knuckle, a move my father had paid for in a self-defense class and then billed me $200 for on page 14 of the spreadsheet. A silver Volvo was idling silently in the corner of the lot. Standing next to it, under the harsh white security light, was Dr. Sloane Mercer. She'd taken off her gray blazer, revealing a crisp white silk blouse. She looked less like a party guest and more like a detective arriving at a crime scene. "I'm not here to give you a hug or tell you it's going to be okay," she said, raising her hands slightly, palms open to show she wasn't armed. "And I'm definitely not here with a message from your parents. I just need 5 minutes of your time, rational time, auditor time, not emotional time." I hesitated, my hand on the car door. My flight response had been pinned for 3 hours, but there was something about her tone, that total lack of pity, that made me pause. The neon sign of the silver spoon flickered, casting a rhythmic, sickly blue light over the hood of my car. Sloane didn't flinch. She stood there with a terrifying level of composure, her eyes scanning the parking lot with the practiced ease of someone who dealt in high-stakes secrets for a living. Her presence was clinical, detached, and precise. It cut through my panic like a diamond through glass. She spoke my language. She spoke the language of compliance, risk assessment, and cold, hard analysis. "You are the geneticist," I said, my voice rasping, the words feeling like sandpaper in my throat. "The one who crashed the party." I am a genetic counselor, she corrected, taking a slow, deliberate step forward. She stopped exactly 10 feet away, perfectly respecting the perimeter I had mentally drawn in the gravel. And I did not crash. I was observing. There is a difference. Observing what? I asked, my grip tightening on the duffel bag. My public execution, my father's highlight reel of how much I cost him. Your parents' performance, she said, her voice flat. She gestured toward the dossier tucked under my arm. May I see that file again? The medical section. I didn't get a chance to finish my review before you exited. I tightened my grip on the plastic cover, the edges digging into my ribs. Why? Do you want to double-check the math? Do you want to confirm that I am a 0% match? I think the room full of cheering relatives already did that for me. I want to confirm that the document is a forgery, she said. The world stopped spinning for a second. The distant hum of the highway seemed to die down. The wind stopped rattling the dry leaves in the gutter. I stared at her, trying to find a flicker of a lie in her eyes, but there was nothing but professional certainty. What? I whispered. I didn't say the result was wrong, Lucy, Sloane said, her eyes locked on mine. I said the document is a forgery. There is a nuance there, a very important one. If you let me see it, I can explain. I looked at her. I looked at the empty, desolate parking lot. I had nothing left to lose. My reputation was gone. My home was gone. My identity was in shambles. If she was lying, what else could she possibly take from me? I walked over to the hood of my car and slammed the dossier down. I flipped it open to the DNA section, the pages fluttering in the cold breeze. Sloane moved in next to me. She pulled a penlight from her pocket, the kind doctors use, professional and heavy. Who carries a penlight to a birthday party? She clicked it on, and a narrow, piercing beam of light swept over the colorful charts and the blocks of text. Look here, she said, pointing to the header. See this logo, Genomic Vistas. It is a real company. They do direct-to-consumer testing. Ancestry, health traits, that sort of thing. But look at the marker panel listed below. I squinted at the tiny print. It just looked like a list of alphanumeric codes to me. It looks like science, I said. It is science, Sloane replied. But it is the wrong kind. These markers, D3S1358 VWA, these are standard CODIS markers used for forensic identification. Law enforcement uses them. Paternity suits use them. But Genomic Vistas doesn't run this panel. They run SNP arrays. It is like ordering a hamburger and getting a taco. They are both food, but they come from different kitchens. She moved the light down to the footer of the page, her finger tracing a small crest. And here, she continued, see the accreditation stamp? It is pixelated, just slightly. If you look at the text next to it, the font is crisp. The stamp is an image that was copy-pasted from another source. It was resized, which caused the artifacts. Whoever made this document took a header from a consumer lab, pasted in forensic data they found somewhere else, and slapped a stamp on the bottom to make it look official. This isn't a medical record, Lucy. It is a collage. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine that had nothing to do with the night air. You are saying they made it up. I am saying this piece of paper is a prop, Sloane said, clicking the light off. The sudden darkness felt heavy. It was designed to look convincing to a room full of laypeople, to your uncle, to your neighbors. This looks irrefutable to them because it has colors, it has big words, and it has a 0% in bold. But in a court of law or in a clinical setting, it is garbage. It wouldn't hold up for 5 seconds. But why? I asked, my voice rising. Why go to all that trouble? If they wanted to prove I am not their daughter, why not just get a real test? Why build a fake one? Sloane leaned back against the car, crossing her arms. That is the question, isn't it? Usually, people forge results when the real results don't tell the story they want. Or, she paused, her expression darkening in the shadows. Or when they don't want a paper trail leading back to a real lab. Real labs keep records. Forgeries disappear when you're done with them. I don't understand, I said, my head throbbing. You said you were observing, I continued. You said you came with a cousin. Why do you care? Why did you follow me here? Sloane sighed. She looked tired suddenly. The professional mask slipped just a fraction, revealing a human being underneath the suit. I used to work in hospital administration, she said. A long time ago. Before I went into private practice, I worked in the records department of a large university hospital system. The same system where you were born, if my memory of your father's boasting is correct. She looked out at the highway, watching the headlights streak by like tracer fire. We had a saying in the basement, she said softly. The ink is dry, but the paper is wet. It meant that sometimes records were changed before they were filed. It didn't happen often, but when it did, it was usually because someone powerful made a phone call. I saw files disappear. I saw birth logs get retyped. I was 22. I needed the job, so I kept my mouth shut. She turned back to me, her gaze piercing. When your father put that file on the table, it triggered something in me. It wasn't just the bad formatting. It was the arrogance. It was the absolute certainty that no one would check his work because he owns the room. I have seen that look before. It is the look of a man who believes he can rewrite reality because he can afford the ink. He thought he could audit your life and find you bankrupt, but he's the one with the fraudulent books. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a business card. It was heavy, textured cardstock. Dr. Sloan Mercer. Genetic counseling, forensic consulting. I don't know if you are their biological daughter or not, Sloan said, but I know that document is a lie. And if they are lying about the test, they are lying about other things. They wanted you to leave tonight, Lucy. They wanted you to run away in shame so you wouldn't ask questions. They wanted you to accept the debt on that spreadsheet as your new identity. I took the card. My fingers were cold. What do I do? You get a real test, she said. An independent one that they can't touch. I can help you arrange it. But more importantly, she leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a whisper that felt like a warning. Do not sign anything. If they contact you, if they send lawyers, if they offer you a settlement in exchange for a signature, do not sign. They didn't stage a show like that just to hurt your feelings. They did it to create a narrative of estrangement. They are building a case. A case for what? I don't know yet, Sloan admitted. But wealthy people don't use fake DNA tests just to save money on grocery bills. There is an asset in play, a big one, something that triggers when you turn 30. I thought of the envelope in the gym bag, the Alpha Fidelity Trust, the key. Sloan was right. She was terrifyingly right. Thank you, I said. Don't thank me yet, Sloan said. This is going to get ugly. Your parents are not going to like that you didn't disappear into the night. She turned to go back to her Volvo, but then she stopped. She looked past me toward the dark corner of the parking lot where the shadows were deepest, near the edge of the tree line. Her posture stiffened. We have company, she said. I turned around. A figure was emerging from the darkness, walking toward us with a slow, hesitant gait. It was a woman. She was wearing a dark trench coat, belted tightly at the waist, and her hands were shoved deep into her pockets as she stepped into the pool of light from the street lamp. My breath caught in my throat. She was about my age, maybe a year younger, maybe a year older, but it wasn't her age that made my heart stop. It was her face. She had my mother's nose, that delicate, slightly upturned slope that I had always envied because mine was straighter, broader. She had my father's jawline, sharp, defined, stubborn. And her hair. It was the same pale, ash-blonde color that my mother paid hundreds of dollars a month to maintain. But on this woman, it looked natural. It looked effortless. She looked more like a Hughes than I did. She looked like the photograph my parents kept on the mantel, not the photograph of me, but the photograph of the family they thought they deserved. It was like looking into a mirror that was reflecting a parallel universe. The woman stopped a few feet away from us. She looked at Sloan, then she looked at me. Her eyes were wide, rimmed with red, as if she had been crying for hours. But her expression wasn't one of hostility. It was one of profound, terrified recognition. I didn't mean to startle you, she said. Her voice was soft, tremulous, and hauntingly familiar. I followed you from the house. I didn't know how to approach you. Who are you? I asked, though deep down, in the pit of my stomach where the ice cream was turning into acid, I already knew. My name is Harper Lane, she said. She took a hand out of her pocket. She was trembling so hard I could see it from 5 feet away. I was at the party, Harper said. I got an invitation in the mail 3 days ago, no return address. Just a card with the date, the time, and a note that said, Come and see where you belong." She looked at the dossier on the hood of my car. "I arrived late," she continued. "The door was unlocked. I heard people in the kitchen. I stood in the hallway behind the coats. I saw everything. I saw what they did to you." She looked up at me, and the resemblance was so painful it physically hurt. It was like seeing the ghost of the daughter my parents had always wanted, finally materialized. "I am sorry," Harper whispered. "I think I am the reason they did it. I think I am the one who was supposed to leave the hospital with them." The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. Dr. Sloan Mercer stood quietly to the side, watching us with analytical intensity, her mind likely already processing the genetic probabilities. I looked at Harper, this stranger who wore my mother's face, and I waited for the anger to come. I waited to feel the jealousy, the rage at this person who had apparently walked out of the shadows to claim the life I had just lost. But the anger didn't come, because looking at her, I saw something else. I saw the cheap, worn coat. I saw the scuffed boots. I saw the raw fear in her eyes. She wasn't a conqueror coming for my throne. She was just as confused, just as manipulated, and just as terrified as I was. "They invited you?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "Yes," Harper said, "but they didn't talk to me. They didn't even know I was there. They sent the invite and let me watch. They wanted me to see." "They wanted an audience," Sloan interjected, her voice sharp. "But more than that, they wanted a replacement on standby. They wanted you to see the vacancy being created in real time." Harper shook her head. "I don't want the vacancy. I saw how they treated you. Who treats a human being like a tax write-off? Who keeps a spreadsheet of their child's calories?" She reached into her pocket again and pulled out a piece of paper. It was a crumpled invitation, printed on the same expensive cardstock my father used for his firm's galas. "I don't want their money," Harper said, her voice gaining a little strength. "And I certainly don't want their last name if that is what it costs, but I need to know the truth. I grew up in foster care, Lucy. I never knew who my parents were. I was told my mother died in childbirth and my father was unknown. And tonight, I looked at your father and I saw my own eyes staring back at me." She looked at me, pleading. "I am not your enemy," she said. "I think we are both victims of the same lie." I looked at Harper, then I looked at Sloan, and then I looked down at the silver key in my hand. The key to a future my parents had tried to hide behind a wall of fake DNA markers and a mountain of debt. "You are not the replacement," I said to Harper, a sudden cold clarity washing over me. "And I am not the mistake. We are the evidence." I unlocked my car. "Get in," I said to both of them. "We can't talk here. My father is an auditor. He counts everything. He's probably counting the minutes until I disappear. I have a feeling that whatever game he is playing, he just dealt himself a losing hand by putting the three of us in the same parking lot." Sloan smiled, a small, sharp expression of professional approval. "I will follow you," she said. "I know a place where we can review the strategy. And Lucy, you might want to finish that banana split. You are going to need the sugar for what comes next." Harper looked at me unsure. "Where are we going?" "To find out what happens when you cross-reference a fake DNA test with a real human being," I said, slamming the car door. "And to find out exactly what this key opens." The wind picked up, swirling dead leaves around our feet. The night was dark, but for the first time since I walked into that kitchen, I didn't feel blind. I had a team. I had a clue. And I had a burning, white-hot need to make sure that the spreadsheet my father was so proud of was about to get very, very complicated. The morning sun did not bring clarity. It brought the harsh, unforgiving light of a procedural investigation. By 8:00 a.m., we were no longer in the emotional haze of a birthday party gone wrong. We were in Dr. Sloan Mercer's office, a space that smelled of antiseptic and lemon polish, filled with sleek chrome and glass. Treating my mouth like a crime scene, Sloan was rigorous. She didn't use the cheap kits you buy at a drugstore. She wore latex gloves and used a professional forensic kit. She swabbed the inside of my cheek for a full 20 seconds, sealed the sample in a biohazard bag, and then made me sign a chain of custody form. "This is how we win," Sloan said, peeling off her gloves with a crisp snap. "Your father's theatrical presentation in the kitchen was hearsay. This is evidence. We are sending this to a forensic lab in the city, rush processing. We will have the biological truth in 48 hours. I sat on the exam table, feeling small and exposed. And what if the biology confirms what he said? What if I really am not their daughter? Biology is just one layer of the truth, Lucy, Sloane replied, sitting down at her desk and opening a laptop. The law is the other. In the eyes of the state, you don't cease to be a daughter just because of a blood test. You cease to be a daughter when the paperwork says so. That is why we need to see the original records. Harper was sitting in the corner chair, looking small and exhausted. She had not slept a wink. None of us had. She was holding a battered, taped-up shoebox on her lap, the sum total of her personal history. I have something, Harper said quietly. She opened the box and pulled out a faded, dog-eared photograph. My foster mom gave me this when I turned 18. She said it was in the bag I came with from the hospital. She kept it all those years. I walked over and looked at the photo. It was a Polaroid of a newborn baby, red-faced and squalling, wrapped in a generic hospital blanket. The baby's wrist was encircled by a plastic identification band. Look at the number, Harper pointed. I squinted. The image was grainy, but the black digits on the white plastic were legible. 089. So, I asked. My birth certificate says I was born at 2:14 in the morning, Harper said. I looked up the hospital logs for that date once. It is public record for statistical purposes. There were only 2 births that night within an hour of each other, me and the Hughes baby. She looked up at me. If I was 89, the other baby would have been 88 or 90. Hospitals issue them sequentially. Sloane spun her chair around, her eyes flashing. Lucy, do you have your birth records? I have my birth certificate, I said. It is in my safety deposit box at the bank, but I have a digital copy on my phone. I needed it for my passport renewal last year. I pulled out my phone, my fingers fumbling slightly as I navigated to my secure document folder. I found the PDF and zoomed in. Name, Lucille Marie Hughes. Date of birth, October 14th, 1995. File number 1004. That is the file number, Sloane said, standing up and looking over my shoulder. I need the bracelet number. It is usually listed in the nursing notes or the intake log if you have the full packet. I scrolled down. I had scanned the entire packet my parents had given me when I turned 18, part of a welcome to adulthood binder they'd made. There, on a scanned page of the certificate of live birth, was a small box for ID band number. It was typed in. 089. The room went silent. That is impossible, Harper whispered. We can't both be 89, that means. That means someone duplicated the entry, Sloane finished, her voice tight. Or someone physically took the bracelet off one baby and put it on the record of the other. It's a classic administrative swap, but they were sloppy. We need to go to the hospital, I said, a cold, hard resolve settling in my stomach. Not to the records department, they'll just give us the runaround. We need the people. Finding someone who worked in the maternity ward 30 years ago was less of a challenge than I expected, thanks to the internet and Sloane's access to medical alumni networks. We found a name, Mrs. Loretta Gable. She had been the head charge nurse on the night shift for 20 years. She was retired now, living in a small bungalow about 20 minutes from the city center. We drove there in my car. Harper sat in the back, silent, clutching her shoebox like a shield. I drove with a mechanical, auditor-like precision, my mind racing through the implications. 2 Bobbies, 1 number. 1 family, 1 lie. Mrs. Gable was a woman made of iron and floral print. She invited us in not because she was friendly, but because when Sloane mentioned the name, Hughes, her face had gone pale, and she had immediately unlocked the screen door. We sat in her living room, which smelled of lavender potpourri and old, dusty secrets. I knew this day would come, Mrs. Gable said. She poured tea into delicate china cups with a hand that wouldn't stop trembling. I told them back then. I said, paper has a long memory. You can't hide the truth in a file cabinet forever. Tell us what happened, I said. Please, my entire life depends on it. Mrs. Gable looked at me, her eyes watery and filled with a heavy, decades-old sadness. "You were the quiet one," she said softly. "The other baby, the one that poor girl brought in." She screamed her lungs out. "But you just watched. You had these wide eyes even as a newborn." "What happened with the bracelets?" Sloane asked, her voice gentle but firm. "We know there was a duplicate number." "It wasn't a duplicate," Mrs. Gable corrected, set her teacup down with a sharp clink. "It was a swap. Mr. Hughes, your father, he was a very intimidating man even back then. He came into the nursery at 3:00 in the morning. He was arguing with the doctor. I didn't hear everything, but I heard him say, 'I will not raise a sickly child. Fix it.'" I felt the blood drain from my face. My breath hitched. "Sickly." "Harper had jaundice," Mrs. Gable said, looking at Harper with a pained expression. And a murmur. "It turned out to be nothing serious, obviously. You grew up strong. But that night you looked fragile. And the Hughes family, they didn't do fragile. They wanted a perfect specimen." She took a long sip of tea. "The doctor ordered me to switch the bands. He said it was an administrative correction. He said the logs were wrong. I knew he was lying. I knew he was afraid of Mr. Hughes and his lawyers, so I did what I was told. I switched the bands, but I made a note." "A note?" I asked. "In the master log," she said. "The physical book, not the computer system they installed later. I wrote, 'Entry amended per Dr. Vance verbal order.' I didn't write what the amendment was. I was too scared. But if you look at the physical archives, you will see the whiteout. You will see where 89 was written over 90. I looked at Harper. She was crying silently. My father had traded her away like a defective product because she had a heart murmur. He had stolen me, a healthy stranger, because I fit the specifications of the daughter he wanted. It wasn't a mistake. It was a transaction. It was an acquisition. We left Mrs. Gable's house in a stunned, heavy silence. The sun was setting, casting long, bruised purple shadows across the street. "So I am the stolen one," I said, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. "And Harper is the discarded one, and my parents are kidnappers." "Technically," Sloane said, looking out the window, "it is custodial fraud, but yes, in every moral sense it's kidnapping. But why now? That's what's nagging at me." "Why blow it up now?" Harper asked from the back seat. "If they got away with it for 30 years, why humiliate you? Why not just keep the secret until they died?" "That is the question," I said, "and I think the answer is in my bag." We pulled into the parking lot of a public library. It was the only place I could think of that was quiet, neutral, and had free Wi-Fi. We found a secluded table in the back corner, near the microfiche machines. I pulled the gym bag onto the table and took out the envelope, the one with the key and the note about the Alpha Fidelity Trust. "Sloane," I said, "you know about compliance, you know about money. What is a disbursement at 30? Sloane took the note. She adjusted her glasses, her eyes scanning the faded ink with predatory focus. "It is a trust fund term," she said. "Wealthy families often set up trusts that release funds at specific milestones to prevent their children from blowing the money when they are too young. 21, 25, 30. 30 is the most common age for a full payout or a total transfer of control." She looked at me, her expression grim. "Lucy, if this trust was set up by someone else, perhaps a grandparent or a biological relative you don't know about, and it was meant for the Hughes heir, then your father has been managing that money for 30 years. But on your 30th birthday, he loses control. The money becomes yours, entirely yours." "Unless," I whispered, the final piece of the puzzle locking into place, "unless I'm not the heir." "Bingo," Sloane said. "If he proves you aren't a Hughes, the trust doesn't go to you. And if Harper, the real heir, is missing or unknown, the money reverts to the estate. It reverts to him." I looked at the silver key. He didn't just want to disown me. He wanted to rob me of a life he stole from me in the first place. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the linoleum floor. "We're going to the bank. And then we're going to give my father a real audit." I sat at the desk in Sloane's home office, the silence of the room punctuated only by the rhythmic hum of the laptop fan. My phone sat between us, its screen glowing with the notification that had just changed the temperature of the room. The sender was Robert Hughes. The subject line was separation agreement, urgent. I didn't even have to click on it to know the contents. I could see the trap in my mind's eye. The legalese, the cold tone, the offer of a $50,000 settlement, check. A pittance compared to the millions currently sitting in the Alpha Fidelity vault. He sent it, I said, my voice sounding hollow in the quiet room. The agreement. Sloane leaned over my shoulder, her eyes scanning the notification. He thinks you're alone, Lucy. He thinks you're in some cheap motel, crying into a pillow, desperate for enough cash to pay your next month's rent. He's counting on your fear. I picked up the silver key. It felt heavy, a solid piece of evidence against 30 years of manipulation. It wasn't just metal anymore, it was a weapon. He wants a signature, I said, looking from Sloane to Harper. I say we give him a meeting instead, but we aren't going to sign his papers. We are going to rewrite them. How? Harper asked, her brow furrowed. We need to get into that safety deposit box, I explained. The key says 42. That's a bank box number. If my mother, or the woman I thought was my mother, had this key hidden away with a note about the trust, it means the original trust documents are in that box. Not the redacted or fake ones Robert might try to show the bank. The real ones. If we find those, we prove that he knew. We prove he knew about the hospital switch from the start and raised me anyway, not out of love, but because he was waiting for the payout. That is criminal fraud. I stood up, the chair scraping sharply against the floor. The confusion that had clouded my brain since the party was gone, replaced by the cold, hard precision of a compliance officer who had just found a major violation in the system. I'm going to Arbor Crest in the morning, I told them. Not to work a shift, but to use the corporate scanner. We are going to build a dossier of our own. And then we are going to have a birthday party. The following afternoon, I met Harper at the only place that felt neutral enough for our two lives to collide. A concrete bench overlooking the reservoir in the city park. The weather was miserable, a gray, blustery day where the wind whipped my hair across my face and turned the water into a choppy, restless mess. It was perfect. I didn't want to be overheard, and I certainly didn't want to be comfortable. I watched Harper walk toward me from the parking lot. It was a surreal, out-of-body experience. It was like watching a deep-fake video of myself, but one generated by an algorithm that had been fed slightly different data. She walked with a heavier, more purposeful stride than I did. Her shoulders were hunched against the wind, her hands buried deep in the pockets of a denim jacket that looked like it had seen a decade of hard work. But the architecture of her face, that high forehead and the stubborn set of the jaw, was undeniably Hughes. She was the rough draft of the masterpiece my parents thought they were painting, while I was the polished forgery. She sat down on the far end of the bench, leaving a careful 2-foot gap between us. For a long time, we just sat there in silence, watching the gray water. You look like her, Harper said finally, her voice barely audible over the wind. Your mother. In the sunlight, you look exactly like her. She is not my mother, I corrected sharply. The words still tasted like ash. She is just the woman who managed my portfolio for 30 years. Harper let out a short, dry laugh. Must be nice having a portfolio. I turned to her. This was the friction point the world expected of us, the princess and the pauper. By all laws of drama, she should have hated me for the private schools and the designer coats, and I should have feared her as the person coming to repossess my existence. It wasn't what you think, I said quietly. The house, the cars. It looks like a lot from the outside, but inside it was a museum. You don't touch the displays, you just exist to be dusted and admired. Harper kicked at a pebble. I grew up in 4 foster homes before I was 12, she said, her voice devoid of self-pity. Then the Lanes adopted me. They run a hardware store in a town you've probably never heard of. My college fund was a jar on the refrigerator. But when I broke my leg in the 10th grade, my adoptive dad slept in a chair next to my bed for 3 nights because I was scared of the pain meds. When I failed my driving test, my mom took me for ice cream and said we'd try again. They didn't audit me. I felt a scorching, blinding jealousy. I had spent 24 hours thinking about the millions in the trust, but Harper had just reminded me what the real theft was. My father billed me for a broken arm. Her father gave her his time. You won, I said, my voice trembling. You got parents, I got investors. Harper looked at me, and the hardness in her eyes softened. I didn't come to take your place, Lucy. I saw them for 5 minutes, and that was enough. They are cold. They are reptiles in human suits. Then why did you come? I asked. Harper pulled out her phone. The screen was cracked. Because they didn't just invite me, she said. They courted me. She handed me the phone and told me to read the thread from the bottom. I scrolled through the emails Robert had sent her over the last 2 months. He had groomed her, telling her he wanted to correct an injustice. But by October 10th, the tone changed. He told her she needed to be at the party as undeniable proof and a living mirror to make the other narrative collapse. The final email, sent the morning of the party, was the worst. Do not approach us initially. We need her completely isolated. We need her broken, not comforted. Once she's removed, we can discuss the terms of your integration into the estate. Integration into the estate, I whispered. He talks about us like software updates. He didn't want you, Harper. He wanted a prop. He needed you there to validate his cruelty. If he just kicked me out, he'd look like a monster. But if he points to the long-lost biological daughter, he looks like a victim trying to restore order. I was never the daughter, Harper said fiercely. I was the gavel. I was the object he was going to use to smash you. I looked at her, at the hands that were shaped like mine, but covered in calluses. Robert had banked on us destroying each other so he could step over the wreckage and claim the money. Divide and conquer. He forgot the first rule of crisis management, I said, a cold smile touching my lips. Never put all your victims in the same room. Eventually, they start comparing notes. I pulled out the key. I'm not fighting you for that house, Harper. Let's take the only thing they actually care about. Let's take the money and bankrupt the firm. We moved our operation to Sloane's office. I was no longer the heartbroken daughter. I was a senior compliance officer conducting an audit on my own life. I started following the stress. I looked into the public property tax records and the credit bureau data. The invincible Robert Hughes was a lie. He had taken a $450,000 second mortgage 3 years ago. My mother had 3 maxed-out credit cards. They were bleeding cash, shuffling debt from one pile to another. But the real discovery came when I pulled the business filings for my father's dormant consulting firm. I found a secured business loan from 2021 for $200,000. I clicked on the guarantor details. My blood ran cold. Guarantor, Lucille M. Hughes, I read aloud. The room went silent. Did you sign for that? Sloane asked. No, I said, my voice shaking with rage. In 2021, I was paying off student loans. I had $5,000 to my name. I didn't even have an investment account to pledge as collateral. Identity theft, Sloane stated. Familial identity theft, I corrected. He didn't just raise me. He spent 30 years building a dummy profile for me so he could harvest my credit. He used me as a shell company. He used my name, my social security number, and my credit profile to secure a loan for his failing business, I said, the words feeling like shards of glass in my mouth. He probably forged my signature. He knew I wouldn't check. Why would I check the credit of a company I didn't own? I leaned back in the chair, the air in Sloane's office feeling suddenly thin. The pieces of the puzzle were slamming together with terrified velocity. For years, I had viewed my father as a pillar of stability, a man who lived by the rigid laws of the ledger. Now I realized he was just a predator who had found his most convenient prey in the cradle. This is why, I said, my voice gaining a cold, sharp edge. This is why they need me gone. If I ever found out about this loan, I could send him to prison. But if I am disowned, if I am painted as a fraud and a stranger, then any claim I make against him looks like retaliation. He destroys my credibility to protect his crime. It is worse than that, Sloane said. She walked over to the whiteboard where she had written the timeline of my life in black marker. The loan is bad, yes, but look at the date on the note from the gym bag, the Alpha Fidelity Trust. Disbursement date, October 14th, 2025. That was yesterday. She drew a heavy, aggressive circle around the date. The loan is $200,000, but a generational trust fund set up 30 years ago, that could be 2 million, maybe 5. So he needs the trust money to pay off the debts, Harper realized, sitting on the edge of her seat. He is drowning, and your grandmother's money is the life raft, but here is the catch. The catch, I said, my compliance brain firing on all cylinders, is that the trust is in my name, Lucille Marie Hughes. If the bank releases the funds, they release them to me, not to him. I am the adult beneficiary. Unless you are not Lucille Marie Hughes, Sloane said. The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. If he proves to the bank that I am an imposter, I said slowly, the horror of the plan finally unfolding in its entirety. If he shows them that DNA test and says, "Oops, we made a mistake. This woman is a stranger we accidentally raised," then the bank cannot release the money to me. I would be disqualified. And if the primary beneficiary is disqualified due to fraud or error, Sloane recited, her voice clinical as she channeled her knowledge of estate law, the funds often revert to the grantor's estate, or if the grantor is dead, to the next of kin of the intended beneficiary. Harper, I said, looking at her. He needs the money to revert to the family line, to the real Hughes bloodline. Harper looked horrified, her hands trembling in her lap. So he wasn't inviting me in to be his daughter. He was inviting me in to be the vessel. He needs you to be the biological heir, I explained, the sickness rising in my throat. But he needs to control you. That is why he wanted you isolated. That is why he wanted to integrate you slowly. He would have made you sign a power of attorney. He would have said, "Honey, this is all very complicated legal stuff. Let Daddy handle the accounts." And then he would have drained the trust to pay off his debts before you even knew the money existed. "And the spreadsheet?" Harper asked. "The list of expenses?" I laughed, a harsh, humorless sound that echoed off the glass walls of the office. That was the insurance policy. That was the leverage. If I refused to sign the waiver, if I refused to accept the narrative that I was a stranger, he would sue me. He would use that spreadsheet to say, "Okay, if you want to stay in this family, you owe us $300,000 in back rent and expenses." He wanted to bury me in debt so deep that I would sign anything just to get out. "It is a moral debt trap," Sloane agreed. "He creates a deficit. You owe them for raising you, and he uses that fake debt to force you to surrender the real asset, the trust fund. It is brilliant." "In a sick, sociopathic way," I admitted. "He covers his identity theft. He steals the trust fund. He clears his debts. And he swaps out a daughter who might ask questions for a new daughter he thinks he can manipulate." "He didn't count on one thing," Harper said. She reached out and tapped a key on her laptop. "He didn't count on me being paranoid." She turned the laptop around so the screen faced us. It was a screenshot of a digital calendar. "How did you get this?" I asked. "I may have guessed his password," Harper shrugged, a flicker of defiance in her eyes. "It was Hughes 1995. He isn't very creative. This is his Google Calendar. Look at tomorrow morning at 9:00 a.m. I leaned in, squinting at the screen. There, in bright blue block letters, was an appointment. Meeting with Alpha Fidelity, account transfer beneficiary adjustment. "He is going to the bank tomorrow," I said, the gravity of the moment settling over me. "He is going to present the fake DNA test. He is going to tell them I am a fraud, and he is going to try to seize control of the trust." "He is moving fast," Sloane said. "He knows the disbursement date has passed. He is technically late. He needs to stop the automatic transfer before the bank processes it." I looked at the clock on the wall. It was 2:00 in the morning. My birthday was officially over. The timeline had shifted from years to hours. "He thinks I'm gone," I said, staring at the blue block on the calendar. "He thinks I am cowering in a motel room, staring at that spreadsheet, feeling guilty for existing. He thinks he has cleared the board." I stood up and walked to the window. The city lights were blinking in the distance, indifferent to my crisis. But I didn't feel indifferent anymore. I felt cold. I felt precise. For 30 years, I had tried to earn my parents' love. I had thought that the distance between us was my fault. I thought if I was just smarter, quieter, more successful, I could close the gap. But the gap wasn't emotional. It was a line item in a ledger. I wasn't a child to them. I was a holding company. and they had just tried to liquidate me. "Sloan," I said, turning back to the room, "you said that for the bank to believe the DNA test, they would need a chain of custody, right? They would need to know it wasn't a prop." "Correct," Sloan said. "A bank like Alpha Fidelity has a compliance department that makes yours look like a lemonade stand. They will want verification." "And if he presents a forgery to a federally insured financial institution to gain access to funds?" I asked. Sloan smiled, and it was a terrifying thing to behold. "That is bank fraud. That is a federal crime. 10 to 30 years in prison." "Then we let him do it," I said. Harper looked at me, confused. "What?" "We don't stop him from going to the meeting," I said. "We let him walk in. We let him sit down. We let him hand over the fake DNA test. We let him make the claim. We let him commit the crime." Sloan finished the thought, catching on. "Exactly. If we stop him now, it is just a family dispute. He can claim it was a misunderstanding. He can claim emotional distress. But if he hands that forged document to the banker, he crosses the line. He seals his own fate." "And then?" Harper asked. "And then we walk in," I said. "The biological daughter, the legal daughter, and the expert witness. We bring the real DNA test. We bring the birth records. And we bring the key." I picked up the gym bag key from the desk. "He wants to close the account on Lucy Hughes. I say we help him. But we are going to make sure he is the one who ends up with a zero balance." The plan was dangerous. It required timing, nerve, and a level of deception I had never practiced before. But I wasn't practicing anymore. I was executing. My father had taught me everything I knew about business. He taught me to be ruthless. He taught me to value the bottom line. Tomorrow, I was going to show him just how much I had learned. We convened at the office of Marcus Thorne, a civil litigation attorney Sloan had recommended. Thorne was a man who looked like he was carved out of mahogany and skepticism. His office was not in a glass tower, but in a renovated brownstone, the kind of place that smelled of old paper and serious hourly rates. He listened to our story without blinking, his pen scratching across a legal pad with a sound that reminded me of a metronome. "We are not going to sue them for emotional distress," Thorne said, leaning back in his leather chair. "Emotions are messy. Juries get confused by tears. We are going to sue them for conversion, fraud, and breach of fiduciary duty. We are going to make this about math." I liked him immediately. "I don't want to go to court if I don't have to," I said. "I want to end this tomorrow. My father has a meeting with Alpha Fidelity at 9:00. He plans to claim the trust fund by declaring me a fraud. I want to stop him before he signs the paperwork." Thorne nodded. "Then we need to set a trap. Not a physical one, but a procedural one. We need to get him to admit on the record that he knows exactly who you are and, more importantly, why he kept you." Sloan placed a manila envelope on Thorne's desk. "This is the independent DNA analysis from the lab in the city. It arrived an hour ago." Thorne opened it, and "It confirms that Lucy is not biologically related to Robert or Elaine Hughes," Sloan said. "However, it also confirms that the document Robert presented at the party was a fabrication. The markers on his report don't match standard human allelic frequencies. He literally copy-pasted random numbers. If he presents that fake report to a bank, he is committing a felony." "Good," Thorne said. "But we need more than bad science. We need proof of intent. We need to prove that this wasn't a recent discovery, as he claims. We need to prove he has been sitting on this secret for years, waiting for the money to vest." I reached into my bag and pulled out the key, the silver key with the masking tape label, 42. "I think the proof is in the safety deposit box," I said. "My mother packed this key by mistake. It opens a box at the First National Bank downtown. I remember going there with her when I was a teenager. She told me it was for family heirlooms. She never let me see inside." "Technically," Thorne said, "if the box is in her name, you can't open it." "It is not in her name," I said. "I checked the key code against the bank's registry online. It is a joint box, Robert Hughes and Lucille Hughes. They put my name on it when I turned 18 so I could access my birth certificate in an emergency. I just never used it." Thorne smiled. It was a sharp, dangerous expression. Then legally, Ms. Hughes, you are just retrieving your own property. Walking into the bank felt like walking into a cathedral of silence. The air was cool and smelled of money, that specific scent of crisp paper and ozone. I showed my ID and the key to the vault manager. He didn't blink. He led me into the secure room, pulled the long metal box from the wall, and left me alone in a private viewing booth. My hands were shaking as I set the box on the table. This was it, the black box of my life. I inserted the key and turned it. The lock clicked open with a smooth, satisfying sound. Inside, there was no jewelry. There were no diamonds or gold. Instead, there was a stack of manila folders and a single, smaller envelope. I opened the top folder. It was a copy of the original hospital discharge papers from 1995. Stapled to the back was a handwritten note from the hospital's head of administration at the time, addressed to Robert Hughes. Robert, we've scrubbed the logs as requested. The discrepancy in the wristbands has been corrected in the final file. There will be no paper trail linking the Lane infant to your account. Consider the matter closed. I felt a wave of nausea hit me. He hadn't just found out. He had orchestrated the cover-up. He had known since day one that he was taking the wrong child, and he had paid to make the real one disappear. I looked at the smaller envelope. Inside was a Polaroid of two Bobbies in the nursery. One was sleeping, the other was crying. On the back, in my father's handwriting, were the words, "The asset and the liability." I closed the box. I didn't need to see anything else. The trap was set, the evidence was in my hands, and tomorrow morning at 9:00 a.m., the spreadsheet was finally going to be balanced. There were no stacks of cash. There was just a thick envelope and a leather-bound journal. I opened the envelope first. It contained the original deed of trust for the Alpha Fidelity Grandmother's Trust. I scanned the legal jargon, my eyes darting across the pages until I found the disbursement clause. To be distributed in full to the granddaughter of the grantor, Lucille Marie Hughes, upon her 30th birthday, provided she is of sound mind and legal standing. And underneath that, paper clip to the back, was a letter. It was dated 20 years ago. I would have been 10. The letterhead belonged to a law firm I didn't recognize, one that had likely dissolved years ago. Dear Robert, regarding your inquiry about amending the birth certificate of the child currently in your care, we strongly advise against this action at this time. While you have expressed concerns about the child's biological origins following the hospital discrepancy you discovered, formally correcting the record would legally sever her status as the named beneficiary in your mother's trust. The trust explicitly names Lucille Marie Hughes. If you change her name or legal status, the funds, approximately $2 million, will bypass your control and be donated to the charitable remainder entity, as per your mother's secondary instructions. Our recommendation is to maintain the status quo until the disbursement date. At that time, once the funds are released to the beneficiary, you can arrange for a transfer of assets within the family. I read the letter 3 times. My breath hitched in my throat. They knew. They had known for 20 years. They had found out I wasn't their daughter when I was 10, probably during a routine medical checkup or blood test, and they had consulted a lawyer. They had a choice: tell me the truth and lose the money, or lie to me for 2 decades and keep the cash. They chose the cash. They didn't keep me because they loved me. They kept me because I was the human key to a $2 million vault. The moment the clock struck 30, the moment I became the legal owner of that money, they needed to break me so I would hand it over. I put the letter back in the envelope. I felt a cold, hard rage settling in my chest, replacing the fear that had been living there for days. I wasn't a daughter. I was an escrow account. I closed the box and walked out of the bank. I called Thorne immediately. "I have it," I said, my voice as cold as the vault air. "I have the smoking gun." "Excellent," Thorne said. "Now let's set the table." We didn't send a legal summons. That would have put them on the defensive. Instead, I sent an email to my father, CCing my mother. Subject: mediation and settlement. Dad, Mom, I have been thinking about what you said. You are right. I don't belong in that house, and I don't want to fight you. I am ready to sign the waiver and discuss the separation terms. I just want to move on. Please meet me at the Ellington Conference Center, Room B, tomorrow at 8:30 in the morning. I want to get this done before your meeting with Alpha Fidelity. Lucy. It was the perfect bait. It played into their ego. It confirmed their narrative that I was weak, broken, and ready to fold. 8:30 gave them just enough time to bully me into signing the waiver before they walked into the bank at 9:00 to collect the prize. They replied 4 minutes later, "We will be there. Do not be late." The Ellington Conference Center was a neutral ground, beige walls, generic art, and a long mahogany table that screamed serious business. We arrived at 7:00 a.m. to prepare the battlefield. Thorne sat at the head of the table. I sat on his right, Harper sat on his left, but we weren't alone. In the corner, sitting in a plush armchair with a cup of tea, was Mrs. Loretta Gable. She looked nervous but determined, her hands clutching her purse. She was our ghost from the past. And sitting next to Thorne was a man in a sharp navy suit. He had silver hair and the kind of posture that suggested he played golf with senators. "Mr. Sterling," I said, nodding to him. "Thank you for coming on such short notice." Arthur Sterling was the senior account manager at Alpha Fidelity. He was the man my father was scheduled to meet at 9:00. When I had called him yesterday and explained that there was a potential security breach regarding the Hughes Trust, he had been very interested. When I told him I had documents proving an intent to defraud his firm, he cleared his schedule. "Ms. Hughes," Sterling said, his voice smooth and professional, "if what you say is true, your father is attempting to weaponize my bank against you. We take fiduciary responsibility very seriously. I am here to observe. If he presents a forged document, he will not be leaving this room with a check. He will be leaving with security." "He will present it," I said. "He is too arrogant not to." At 8:25, the door opened. My parents walked in. They looked impeccable. My father was wearing his closer suit, charcoal gray with a silk tie. My mother was in a cream-colored dress that made her look like a benevolent angel. They walked with the confidence of people who had already won. "Lucy," my father said, not even looking at the other people in the room yet, "I am glad you came to your senses. It is a tragedy, really, but we need to." He stopped. He saw Harper. His eyes widened. He hadn't expected the replacement to be sitting next to the defect. Then he saw Thorne, the lawyer. That was annoying, but manageable. Then he saw the man in the navy suit. I watched recognition flicker across my father's face. He knew Arthur Sterling. He had probably Googled him 100 times in preparation for his 9:00 meeting. "Mr. Sterling," my father stammered, "I have an appointment with you at 9:00 at your office." "Ms. Hughes invited me to join this preliminary discussion," Sterling said, folding his hands on the table. "She suggested that since all parties are present, we could expedite the verification process regarding the trust disbursement." My father's jaw tightened. He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw real fear in his eyes. He realized he wasn't walking into a surrender. He was walking into an audit. "This is a private family matter," my mother hissed, stepping forward. "Lucy, what is this? Who are these people?" "These are the truth, Mom," I said. My voice was steady. I didn't feel like crying. I felt like a judge. "You wanted a trial. You wanted to put everything on the table. Okay, let's do it." I slid the real DNA report across the table. "This is a certified DNA test from a forensic lab," I said. "It confirms I am not your biological daughter." My father let out a breath, a small smirk returning to his lips. "See, we told you. You are admitting it." "Read the second page," Thorne said. My father frowned and flipped the page. "It also confirms," Thorne continued, "that the document you presented 3 days ago contained markers that do not exist in the human genome. It was a forgery, and presenting a forged document to explain a financial separation is fraud." "That was an illustrative aid," my father sputtered. "The results were the same." "And this," I said, sliding the next document across the table. It was the copy of the hospital log Mrs. Gable had helped us find, the one with the whiteout. "This is the birth log from Mercy General. It shows that 2 Bobbies were born that night, one with bracelet 89, one with bracelet 90. It shows that someone altered the record to swap them." I pointed to the corner of the room. "And this is Mrs. Gable, the nurse you ordered to make the switch." My mother gasped. She turned and looked at the old woman in the armchair. Mrs. Gable didn't shrink away. She met my mother's gaze with a sad, steady look. "Hello, Elaine," Mrs. Gable said. "I kept the notebook." My mother collapsed into a chair. She looked like the strings had been cut. "This is ridiculous," my father snarled, though his face was turning a dangerous shade of red. "So what? Even if there was a swap, which I deny, it proves Lucy isn't our daughter. It proves she has no claim to the family money. The trust is for our granddaughter, not a stranger." He pointed a finger at me. "You are nothing. You are a mistake." "Actually," I said, "I am the investment vehicle you used to secure your lifestyle." I placed the final document on the table, the letter from the safety deposit box. "You knew," I said. "You knew 20 years ago. You consulted a lawyer. He told you that if you told the truth, you would lose access to the grandmother's trust. So you kept me. You raised a stranger because you needed a warm body to keep the account open." I looked at Mr. Sterling. They didn't just lie to me. They lied to Alpha Fidelity. They maintained a fraudulent guardianship for 2 decades to ensure the funds wouldn't be donated to charity. And now they are trying to discard the vessel so they can claim the cash. Mr. Sterling picked up the letter. He read it. His expression went from polite interest to cold fury. "Mr. Hughes," Sterling said, "this letter indicates a conspiracy to defraud the trust. You knowingly withheld information regarding the beneficiary status to prevent the triggering of the charitable remainder clause." "That letter is privileged," my father shouted. "You can't use that." "It was in a joint safety deposit box," Thorne said calmly. "Lucy had every right to retrieve it." My father looked around the room. He looked at Harper, who was watching him with absolute disgust. He looked at Mrs. Gable. He looked at the banker who held his financial future in his hands. He realized the walls had closed in. There was no exit. "I did what I had to do," my father whispered. It was a confession. The business was failing, Mother's money. It was the only way to save the house, to save everything. "You didn't save everything," I said. "You lost the only 2 things that actually mattered." I looked at Harper and she nodded. "You wanted a daughter. Well, here she is. Harper is your biological child. She is the one you should have raised, but you threw her away because she was sickly. And you kept me because I was profitable." "And now," Harper said, her voice cutting through the room like a blade, "neither of us wants you." Mr. Sterling stood up and pulled a cell phone from his pocket. "Mr. Hughes, I am freezing the trust pending a full internal investigation. And given the nature of this document," he held up the fake DNA test my father had brought, "I am legally obligated to report this attempted fraud to the authorities." My father slumped into his chair. He looked small. The giant who had dominated my life, who had billed me for my own existence, was just a desperate man in a suit he couldn't afford. I stood up. I felt light. The weight of the last 30 years was gone. "The meeting is over," I said. "You have your answer. Dad, you have your audit." I turned to Harper. "Ready to go?" "More than ready," she said. We walked out of the conference room together, leaving my parents sitting in the wreckage of their own design. They had set a trap for me, hoping I would disappear. Instead, they had just confessed to the world that they were the ones who never really existed. The conference room was silent, but it was not the empty, hollow silence of the kitchen 3 nights ago. This was a heavy, suffocating silence. My father sat across from my empty chair, his hands still resting near the dossier he had brought, the one containing the forged DNA results. He had walked in here like a general expecting a surrender. Now, he looked like a man realizing he was standing on a trapdoor. He tried one last time to regain control. He cleared his throat, adjusting his silk tie, attempting to summon the voice that had commanded boardrooms for 3 decades. "This is all very dramatic," he said, waving a hand dismissively at the documents I had laid out. But the hand was shaking. The audit was over, and for Robert Hughes, the balance was 0. The atmosphere in the room was no longer heavy. It was oxygen depleted. My father sat there, a man who had built a career on the precision of a spreadsheet, realizing he had miscalculated the most important variable of all, the default clause. The real DNA test, the hospital logs, the letter from the safety deposit box, All of it sat on the table like evidence at a crime scene. But my father, ever the shark, tried to bite one last time. "It is irrelevant," he snapped, his voice a jagged edge. "The fact remains, Lucy, that you are not our blood. You are a stranger, and as a stranger, you have no claim to the Hughes family trust. That money belongs to our biological granddaughter." He gestured toward Harper, who sat like a statue carved from obsidian. "We are simply correcting an error," he continued, eyes darting to Arthur Sterling, the Alpha Fidelity representative. "Mr. Sterling, surely you understand. We cannot disburse a multi-million-dollar inheritance to a woman who committed identity fraud by impersonating an heir." I didn't scream, I didn't cry. A strange, glacial calm washed over me, the cold clarity of a courtroom. "I didn't impersonate anyone," I said, my voice low but carrying into every corner of the room. "You impersonated a parent." I pushed the letter from the safety deposit box toward Mr. Sterling. "They knew," I told the banker. "They knew for 20 years. They kept me in their house, let me use their name, and signed legal documents as my guardians knowing full well I wasn't their child. They waited until the clock ran out." Sterling read the letter slowly, his face an impassive mask. He placed it down and looked at my father with the clinical gaze of a man who had seen every flavor of greed. "Mr. Hughes," Sterling said, "you seem to misunderstand the terms of the trust your mother established. It is an irrevocable instrument. It names Lucille Marie Hughes as the beneficiary. It does not say the biological offspring of Robert Hughes. It names a person, a legal entity." My father scoffed, a desperate sound. "A person who doesn't exist, she is a fraud." "She is the person you raised," Sterling corrected sharply. "And legally, she is the person named in the documents you filed for 30 years. But here is the problem you have created for yourself." Sterling leaned forward, the mahogany table reflecting his sharp navy suit. "If you prove that Lucy is a stranger, and if you successfully strip her of the name Lucille Marie Hughes, you do not inherit the money. You trigger the default clause." My father froze. "The what?" "The default clause," Sterling repeated. "If the named beneficiary is incapacitated, deceased, or disqualified due to fraud, the funds are not returned to the family. Your mother was very specific about that. She didn't trust you with the principal, Mr. Hughes. If Lucy is removed, the entire trust, all $5 million of it, is immediately liquidated and donated to the feline rescue charity your mother loved." The color drained from my father's face, so fast it looked like a physical injury. My mother let out a small, strangled sound. "Cats," my father whispered, $5 million to cats. "Unless," Sterling said, "Lucille Marie Hughes signs a voluntary release, unless she legally transfers her rights to a designated successor." The room seemed to tilt. My father looked at me, and the arrogance was gone. The anger was gone. In their place was naked, desperate greed. He realized the trap he had built for me was now his own cage. He needed my signature to move the money to Harper before the bank handed it to a shelter. "Lucy," he said, his voice cracking. He reached across the table, his hand trembling. "Lucy, listen to me. We can fix this. Just sign the paper. Sign the waiver. We will give you a cut. We will give you 10%. That is $500,000. You can start over. You can go away and have a nice life." "A cut," I repeated. "You are offering me a commission on my own life." "We just need you to confirm you are not the heir," he shouted, losing his composure completely. "We need you to sign the papers so we can give it to Harper. It stays in the family. Harper is your sister, sort of. You wouldn't take money away from her, would you?" He pivoted to Harper, flashing a desperate, manic smile. "Harper, tell her you want your birthright. We can be a family. We can fix all of this." Harper stood up. The chair scraped against the floor, a harsh sound that made my mother flinch. Harper looked at the man who had fathered her, then at the woman who had birthed her. She looked at the expensive suits, the hollow eyes, and the even hollower souls. "I am not your birthright," Harper said, her voice shaking with fury. "And I am not your second chance." She walked around the table until she was inches from my father. "I grew up wondering why I wasn't wanted. I spent my whole life thinking there was something wrong with me. But listening to you today, watching you try to bargain with Lucy like she's a used car, I realized I was the lucky one. You didn't throw me away. You saved me." "Harper, please," my mother begged. "We did it for the family." "You don't have a family," Harper said. "You have a business and you just went bankrupt." She turned to me. "I don't want the money, Lucy, not if it comes from them, not if it means I have to sit at their table and pretend this is normal." "You won't have to," I said. I looked at Mr. Sterling. "I am Lucille Marie Hughes. My birth certificate says so. My driver's license says so. And the 30 years of receipts my father kept say so. I am the beneficiary." "You are," Sterling agreed. "The bank recognizes you as the sole claimant." "Good," I said. "Then I want to issue my first instruction as the owner of the trust." My father's eyes lit up with a flicker of hope. He thought I was going to negotiate. He thought I was going to cut him a check to save his house. "Freeze it," I said. My father's mouth fell open. "What?" "Freeze the assets," I told Sterling. "Initiate a full external audit of the last 30 years of guardianship. I want to know every penny that was spent. I want to know about the loan my father took out in my name. I want to know about the credit cards. I want a forensic accounting of my entire existence." "That will take months," Sterling warned. "Years, maybe. The funds will be locked. No one will be able to touch them." "I know," I said. I looked at my parents. "You wanted to live by the spreadsheet? Fine, let's look at the numbers, every single one of them. And while the lawyers are looking, you don't get a dime. You don't get the payout to cover your mortgage. You don't get the cash to hide your debt." "You can't do this," my father screamed, slamming his hand on the table. "I raised you, I fed you, you owe me." "I don't owe you anything," I said, standing up. "You presented me with a bill for $300,000, remember? Well, consider the trust fund my payment, and consider the audit my receipt." I picked up my bag. I picked up the real DNA test. "You gave me 1 hour to leave your house," I said. "I am leaving now, but I'm taking the name with me. I am taking the money with me, and I'm taking the daughter you actually wanted with me." I knotted my scarf and looked at Harper. She fell into step beside me. My parents sat there, frozen in the wreckage of their own scheme. My mother was weeping now, silent, ugly tears that ruined her makeup. My father was staring at the wall, his face gray, realizing that his house of cards had incinerated. He had played the game of his life, and he had lost to the 2 people he thought were pawns. We walked out of the conference room, down the long hallway, past the security guards, and through the heavy glass doors. I stepped out into the morning air. It was crisp and cold. The wind bit at my cheeks, but for the first time in 30 years, it didn't feel like a chill. It felt like oxygen. I looked down at my hands. They were empty. I wasn't holding a bottle of cheap wine. I wasn't holding a dossier of lies. I wasn't holding the weight of their expectations. Harper stood next to me, taking a deep breath. "So," she said, looking at the skyline, "you just froze $5 million. "It seemed like the responsible thing to do," I said, a small smile tugging at the corner of my mouth. "Compliance, you know, gotta follow the rules." "What do we do now?" she asked. I looked at her, the sister I never knew I had and the friend I desperately needed. Now we go get breakfast. I think I can afford it." I walked toward my car, my heels clicking on the pavement with a steady, rhythmic sound. I was 30 years old. I had no parents. I had a messy, complicated legal battle ahead of me. But as I unlocked the door, I realized something profound. They had tried to turn me into a line item. They had tried to erase me. But in the end, they were the ones who had been zeroed out. I was Lucy Hughes, and I was priceless. Thank you so much for listening to my story. It was a long journey from that cold kitchen floor to the freedom of this morning, and I am so glad I could share it with you. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. Are you listening on your commute, at the gym, or maybe while organizing your own life? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed seeing justice served, please make sure to subscribe to the Real Reddit Revenge channel. Hit that like button and smash the hype button so more people can hear the truth. Until next time, remember, know your worth and never let anyone treat you like a discount.